Coming up now, a special bonus for Mind the Gap listeners. Michael Comyn, the voice behind this podcast and the author of the new book that shares its name, recently appeared on The Late Lunch with Gerry Kelly on LMFM. In this conversation, Michael talks about the ideas that shape the book, how it connects with the podcast, and what readers can expect to take away from it. Here's that interview with Gerry Kelly.
It's about a year since I had a chat with my next guest. When I tell you that he's a broadcaster, coach and a facilitator with over 35 years experience. Indeed, he was a presenter on this very station, LMFM, and on RTE Radio 1. He is the voice that you hear on the railways very frequently. And of course, we were chatting to him about his podcast series, Mind the Gap. Mind the Gap now moves from podcast to print. Michael Comyn, welcome back to the show.
Good afternoon, Gerry. And yes, it's all your fault. You're completely to blame for the whole thing.
And you know what? I'm delighted to be blamed for it because congratulations to you. You've brought it on another step now. Tell us first, Michael, this began as the podcast, of course. What inspired you to now bring it out in book form?
Well, it's funny, there's several occasions we got great feedback from different listeners who all said, look, is there anywhere I can read this? And I suppose it's a fair point. Some people like to hear things and others like to be able to pick something up and read and go back over it and back over it again. And I just took it on as a bit of a challenge and ended up putting it together in the form of a book. And I have to say, I thought I would chew my leg off before I'd ever write a book. I have to say, being a broadcaster rather than a writer, it's so much easier for us to talk, isn't it? But anyway, I managed to get it done and, 293 pages later, and it's out now.
Terrific. The title itself, Mind the Gap, of course, familiar from transport users on the rail network for sure. But in the context of you and your work, the podcast now the book, what does it mean in that context?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it's about the gap between the stimulus and the reaction. And so, keeping it simple, stimulus is somebody says something to you. And the reaction then is, how we feel after it. And all of the different psychologists over the years, and then even the Stoics from thousands of years ago, said that there's a gap. And in that gap is where our skill lies. So say, for example, you come off the show today now and you're walking down the corridor and somebody says, oh, that wasn't too bad today. Now, that's a stimulus. And then you hear that and your whole self reacts with, oh my God, what's wrong? And you end up with sometimes this cascade of anxiety. Whereas if you had the ability to pause, count to three and go, oh, someone's having a bad day. I'm not taking it up. And it is. Isn't that the difference?
It is.
The hurler on the ditch is one of the chapters in the book. And the number of times we wish we could have just paused for a second, reacted in sometimes a more considered way. And, I had somebody say something to me the other day, which was sort of a little bit mean. And I picked up a phrase which, when we were putting the book together, which was, that must have sounded so much better in your head before you said it. Well, he looked at me like and I just thought, yes, I've done it. I've actually been able to put somebody, and look, you have to have a bit of kindness because if you assume that everybody says everything and that they've thought it out for ages and they've considered all the impact, we don't. We the things fly out of our mouth, and sometimes, if you've ever accidentally offended somebody or you've said something and you wonder why somebody took the hump with you, that's very often the emotional challenge that's there for us. It happens very quickly.
Michael, you've given me another tool to my kit, or you've enhanced my armour even with those words, and I'm sure many listening today, because I'm inclined to shoot from the hip and then think later, and then I know the way it gets you then, and you start overthinking things and that as well.
Oh, I know, and it feels awful. And
yes.
I'll give you one more while you're at it. It's a great phrase, and I always use it in coaching, which is when the person says something to you, just say, tell me more. And in the space, you're making yourself pause, but you're making them think. Because, the thing I said to you already about somebody just shooting from the hip, if somebody needs to say something and it isn't very polished, and you say, look, go back, no, sorry, tell me more about that. And what did you mean by that? And they have to then reframe it. And invariably, they'll end up reframing it in a better way, or possibly even apologising.
Yes, interesting. Really, really solid stuff there. Now, in this work and in your podcast work as well, you bring together three aspects: psychology, emotional intelligence, and stoicism. How do you marry them in the book?
Because, funny enough, we'll give the Stoics the first credit. And this is a bunch of usually old men. There were one or two Stoic women as well. I often, in the book, even mentioned the first Stoic I ever met was my own mother. But anyway, the Stoic is a person who has a view on life. And it's often misunderstood that, that they're emotionless. Indeed, they're not. But what they do is, and all of the great Stoics have simple little quotable phrases. But my favorite is, we can't control what's happening, but we can control how we're reacting to it. And, I know a fellow called Marcus Aurelius said this about 2,500 years ago, and it still holds true today. And it informs a lot of the modern psychology that's out there. And the other one is the emotional intelligence that you hear talk about. But, these lads knew this a long, long time ago, but it seems to have gotten forgotten. I have a chapter there about anger, and everybody's so angry now and so quickly to get angry. Just go onto any social media platform and people are firing off left, right and centre. Now, it doesn't mean to say we're passive. I am a great believer in something called righteous anger, or the phrase is, don't ever lose your temper, find it. That's scary. Yeah. If you're with somebody who's coldly angry about something, that is a very hard thing to defend yourself against as somebody who's fired it off, steam off the top of their head.
And you're right, the anger is palpable and obvious and that as well, and it's just never ending now, facilitated of course by that world of social media where anyone could go on there, say anything they bloody like nearly, and that's underpinning this as well. That's why we need, you see, you and Mind the Gap, the podcast and the book to help us navigate and get through this and understand it. This is something that I was curious about, and it's a question I'm sure has been put to you on many occasions. For you yourself, looking at the book you've written, as you said, which is a new departure for you, and the podcast where your real strength lies, may I say, did that process change how you viewed the podcast and your oral work?
Yes, absolutely it has. And I suppose if I was being really honest, I've put a bit of my own soul into this. In other words, I've been very honest in the podcast and even so in the book about how I've dealt with it. Because, on the surface, I would have presented, indeed present myself as a fairly confident individual, a broadcaster, public speaker, etc. But I've always found there was an element of anxiety, being anxious about things. And, whether it's first child syndrome or whatever the fancy title you want to put on it, is I would always sometimes err on the side of being anxious about something. And the shame of it is that you've got to wait until you're in your 60th birthday passes and you think, why couldn't I have dealt with this sooner? Why didn't I get a chance for somebody to say to me when I was 29, you'll be grand. They're fine. They're having a bad day. It's not about you. And that's what I wanted to do with this, was just give people that little bit of a word of advice. I as you know, I do a fair amount of coaching with people. And one of my coachees was only talking to me this morning. And, she said that she used a line that I gave her 2 years ago and it was effective. And I have to say, that makes life fantastic. Yeah. When you think that you might have said something to somebody that they later used to make life less anxious. And that's the goal. That's ultimately what I want to do.
Today in the world, it's overwhelming for many people. Life is overwhelming today, more so, I think, than ever before in the past. Give us a nugget, will you, from the podcast stroke book that listeners today can take with them?
I suppose the key one I have is the power of the pause. And, the power of the pause is a phrase that Stoics use, emotional intelligence uses, and even modern psychology uses. If you get a good understanding of how your brain works, our brain, at a beautiful organ, when you think about it, is designed to keep us safe. And so it triggers very, very quickly. It fires off. Like if you've ever been on the road and you see somebody with road rage, that's somebody whose survival instincts have overfired. Their response is disproportionate. Your listeners might remember many years ago, I used to do a program to help people with the fear of flying.
Yes.
And, I still occasionally get people interested. It might even be the next book. But the main thing about that one was, you're heading away on your holidays. You're sitting on an airplane. You're absolutely terrified out of your life. And there's 167 other people asleep or drinking a drink. And, the idea that in our world, we can be having a reaction that just isn't required or appropriate for what's actually happening. And so the biggest skill of all that I would pass on is this thing they call in psychology reality testing. Test the reality of what's going on. Now, you know what? If you sit down in front of an old action movie, you don't want any reality testing. You know, you don't want to think that halfway through the film they all stopped and had a hamburger and went back to work the next to do the rest of the film. You throw yourself into the story. But if it's affecting your work, if it's affecting your relationship, if it's, you know, I was talking to somebody the other day who throws up every morning before they go to work.
My
now,
God.
What's that about?
Yes.
Like, what in heaven's name is worth that physical reaction to, you know, maybe being able to put food on the table or pay your mortgage? All very, very valuable reasons. But what about all the communications we could fix for that person as to how they see their day that morning when they stand up on the rail? And it's a goal I have, is the elimination or reduction of anxiety, because there's nothing worse than you being anxious all the time. And then, you know what, you've got 2 or 3 days left at the end when, you know, of your life to be happy. It doesn't work like that.
No.
Now is the day. Somebody said to me once that someday isn't one of the 7 days of the week.
That is so true. And, you know, we're all caught up in this rat race, if you like to call it, and you push it out and you say, I will do it, or I might, and I will have the time in the future. And sometimes we're not granted that time to actually do as you say. At the end of each chapter, which is really interesting, you include a reflection, which I always love. I always love in the genre book that you've published now. Why was it important for you to have those, bookend the chapters?
Well, it's probably the trainer in me as well, is that, and also I have this thing of I love to take notes in a textbook and write things down. It's that reaction that you have. So, you know, for example, at the end of one of the chapters here, I have a couple of questions. One of them is, you know, have you recently taken on something that was never yours to carry? Or do you know the difference between helping and enabling? You know, they're just little questions. Now, if you carry that around with you for the rest of the day in your head, you'll get a wonderful insight. Yeah. There's a school of philosophy that I subscribe to, is that every person has the answer. They're just getting in their own way. Mm. We're a remarkable species as human beings. We don't need someone to tell us what to do. We generally know what we should be doing, but something's not giving us permission or something's blocking us. So the idea of the reflection, and I'm delighted that you like it, it's just one of those things. You read the chapter, so now what? Yeah. And that's nearly where the book came from, because in the podcast, again, you know, it's 10 minutes every Saturday morning. It's designed for you when you're, you know, doing your walk or emptying the dishwasher. A lot of people say to me, yeah, that's great. But then by Tuesday morning, it had gone out of my head. So now you can pick up the book, and it's written in such a way, Gerry, that you'd read chapter 17 before you read chapter 1.
Yes.
Whatever suits you in the table of contents. So, you know, you might pick it up and see, you know, a chapter which is forgiveness isn't forgetting, or one that people seem to love is the fear of being ordinary, which is an interesting idea. Or, you know, the other one is called the second arrow, which is a lovely idea from the Buddhist world, which is the first arrow wounds us, and you know, and we have a reaction to it. It's the second one, which the one we fired off ourselves, is how we choose to react to it. Whereas if you get, you know, something bad happens to you, you go, wow, okay, now what do I do? What resources do I have? And how do I stop myself becoming worse, not through what's happening to me, but what I'm telling myself?
Yes. You sit there, would you, for a moment for me? I want to take a short break in the show. Sure. I have a few more questions to put to you, and they're asking me already. That book sounds amazing, says a listener. I need to get a copy for my daughter. Where do I get it? We're going to tell you in a moment. Michael Comyn is with me on Late Lunch. Can I ask you this, Michael? A little bit of a personal question. How much of your journey is in this?
Oh gosh, a lot of it. I certainly would, because, you know, as I mentioned to you, I've always been, I suppose, if I was getting me really deep here now for a second, Gerry, but I suppose, why did I get into radio in the first place? You know, why did I love broadcasting so much? Is because you can actually put a bit of a mask on. And this week's episode of the podcast is called The Masks We Wear at Work. And we all wear a mask, you know, in the sense that, you know, I'm chatting to you and your listeners hear me, but they don't know everything about me. And I, like you, probably put a little bit of a presence when we're doing that. The shame of that, unfortunately, is not only about that hide your insecurities sometimes, but it hides your strengths as well. And as you get that little bit older, certainly as I've got that little bit older, I've learned to drop the masks and just be me. And nobody said, oh, we don't like that. And in fact, they're just as happy with it. Sometimes I now can say no to somebody, and the world doesn't stop pivoting. So they're the, if you like, as I said, that's a really good question, because you set me back to think about it. But yeah, it's very much a personal journey.
Yeah, excellent. For someone listening to us today who perhaps hasn't heard the podcast, and we're reminding them now the book is out, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Which is the starting point? What do you suggest?
Okay, I would say that, well, first of all, you can find the podcast wherever you get your podcast. There are a couple of podcasts out there called Mind the Gap. It's just obviously a catchy enough phrase, but if you spot my name with it, so it's Michael Comyn, Comyn, you'll get that fairly quickly. The book is designed as a companion. So it covers certainly season 1 and part of season 2. In fact, the book even contains some of the episodes that we haven't put out yet as a podcast. It's that up to date. The book itself won't be available in bookshops until January, but it's available now for anybody who wants to get it on Amazon on Kindle. So amazon.ie, you can get the book straight away, and then it'll be in general release in January. That's just the way they like to work with it. So that's the general idea. And would you believe, this afternoon now when I finish with you, I go back to recording the audio version of the book. So there's enough going on between now and Christmas to keep me busy.
Certainly is. And it is for everybody. It's not for any particular category of person or stage in life or anything like that. It's across the board.
No, well, I'm going to push back a little bit on that, in that I think you have to have lived a little bit to read it.
Fair enough.
So, because some people are saying, oh, that sounds perfect for my teenager. Yes, probably. But I think it's falling on ears that haven't really had maybe the experiences. Now, I could be wrong, and so I'm not going to exclude anybody, but the people I wrote it for was the 28 plus. Okay. And there's a reason in that 28, because that's the age of our emotional maturity. It takes us until we're 28 to become emotionally mature, according to the psychologists. And then at around 65, it just disappears because you don't care anymore. So there's a window between 28 and 65 where we're still looking over our shoulder all the time. And that's what I want to try and, accelerate a little bit.
God, I'm only a short while from not caring anymore. Thanks, Michael.
Lovely,
isn't it just great to look forward to it? Anyway, look, please, I have more questions here. Where can we find out more about this book, please? There's a number of listeners onto me there. Tell them again, just once more.
Amazon.ie, and there's a link at the bottom of every podcast episode. And sure, I'll even send it on to you if you want as well for your page. So yeah, you'll have it there. But yeah, just have a look for Mind the Gap with Michael Comyn, and you'll find it there. And I've been told people love the fact that they keep picking it up and putting it back down again, and that to me is the highest compliment. I showed it to somebody the other day here, and she stopped listening to me in the conversation because she started reading the book in front of me. So there you go.
And there are many people saying they're loving listening to you. They love your voice. Radio Mike from Kells loved your show, a nighttime show of easy listening on radio as well.
That's a while ago.
Yes,
absolutely.
And it just shows your familiar voice, and you're back on, and they recognise you. What a man you are. More books, I'm sure, more podcasts, and other stuff in the future. I can't let you go today. I'm sorry, Michael, but somebody else has said, please, Gerry, ask him to say it. You know what they're referring to. Just one more time. What we hear when we're on the transport to Dublin or beyond.
The next station is Drogheda. Please stand clear of the closing doors. And please mind the gap.
Michael, you're a gentleman. I'm sure you're like weathermen or women who, get asked about the weather every day. But look,
I know nothing about the trains. You're grand.
You're a gentleman and a scholar. Thank you so much for joining me again on the
Gerry.
show.
Talk to you soon.
Take care now, Michael. Bye-bye. Isn't he just lovely? Michael Comyn there, Mind the Gap. What a terrific man he is. Late Lunch, LMFM Radio. It's Miles Smith and stargazing he is on your Late Lunch.
That was Michael Comyn on The Late Lunch with Gerry Kelly on LMFM. If you enjoyed that conversation, subscribe and stay with us here on Mind the Gap. A new episode arrives every week with fresh ideas to carry into your day. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.